I'm another reluctant prophet. I guess there's a lot of us. I don't know of any prophet who actually likes his or her job. People love you when you predict good things, hate you when you tell them the bad things. We read the signs of the times and tell it like it is. The only one who promises to have our backs is God. I spoke God's words just as the land of Judah was on its last gasps of life. I told them what was inevitable, that they would be taken into exile, singing the sacred songs in a strange land. And to add insult to injury, I wasn't allowed to go with them. I needed to stay back in the land. I had to tend that desolate land. I had to live on in an even lonelier existence. At least the Hebrew people had each other in exile. All I had was the empty land. So God told me to buy a field and tend it until the people came back. So I wrote in my diary all of my laments for the people, my laments for the land, my laments for myself. And now I long for my people so far away. I hope they can have life. I hope and pray they can return. But the only way for them to do that is if they live. They need to live on in spite of the exile. God told them they need to be in exile for 70 years. That's 3 generations as far as I can count. When they return, I'll be long gone. But this land ought to be here. So what they need to do now is live so that they can come back. So here's the message that I have for the exiles living in Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to Yahweh on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I know the promise of God is that exile is a step on the journey, but it's not the end of the journey. The goal is always and has always been the land of freedom, the land flowing with milk and honey. The goal is always communion with God and blessing of one another. The goal is always paradise, whether we can see it or not. I hope and pray they can see it. In the year 587, the Hebrew people were conquered by the Babylonian army. The land was looted, ancient artifacts disappeared, the temple was burned to the ground, and the people were sent off to Babylon, and the land was taken from them. Such is the way of the world, it seems. Regimes will come and go, empires will come and go, political parties will be voted in and out, rebellions will rise up, and people in hopes and dreams will be dashed and deferred and even realized. Prophets who were ignored as annoying sad sacks will all of a sudden seem like prodigious prognosticators. Armies come in and take control of what is left. New governments come in, new laws are passed. Inevitably, insurgency emerges. Uncertainty abounds. Counterinsurgency fights back. Counter-revolutionaries get funded from other governments. There's a sense of chaos. And the chaos can last for a very long time. And it usually lasts until people remember who they are and whose they are. Until the narrative are is so embraced that they realize that exile is a state of mind. They reclaim their moral and theological core and forge a new, renewed path. Exile is a path, but it can also become a pathology. There was a time not too long ago when our church was in a time of exile. We were in exile because our denomination had been taken over by forces that tried to rewrite what it was to be Baptist. Green Lake, the story that Jean told us, was a symptom of a larger issue. We found ourselves constantly articulating why we deserved to be at table with our sisters and brothers. Churches were getting kicked out of the denomination. Faithful American Baptists were called heretics for advocating inclusion for all of God's people. People were denied ordination. We were feeling like we were in exile. Do you remember that feeling of betrayal? That's the constant thread that runs through this notebook of letters. As I was reading it again, it had been a long time since I'd read it, I just saw over and over and over again the feelings of betrayal written on those pages. Jeremiah must have felt in a similar way. He lamented the fact that no matter how much he told the people that they needed to amend their ways or be thrown into exile, they ignored him and they laughed at him. They even favored prophets that told them what they wanted to hear. Jeremiah, the realist, was ignored. At some point, he needed to change his tune. And today's scripture is about that moment. Jeremiah spends the first half of his book telling the people that they were going to be thrown into exile. It was inevitable. But now that they were there, did it make sense to continue putting them down? No. Jeremiah told them to build houses, plant vineyards. He told them to have children, hold marriage celebrations, even pray for the deliverance and the welfare of the city in which you find yourselves. Is this giving up? Is Jeremiah just telling people to acquiesce? No. He was telling them to do something even more radical. The Babylonian army expected the Hebrew people to just disappear. They wanted them to be so humiliated that they would turn their heads toward the wall and simply give up. And there's the transforming initiative that Jeremiah gives them. Build, plant, marry, have babies, pray for your enemy's welfare. If you do that, then you'll live. You'll not only live, you'll thrive. What if, when a team loses a game that they should have won, that they all just give up on the rest of the season? They stop believing in themselves. Well, if they do that, then they're long gone. The test of a team is to see how they step up in the midst of adversity. I'm looking forward to watching the game. 1 o'clock this afternoon. The church I served in San Francisco had a tumultuous year in 1992. They lost their building, they lost their pastor, and they lost their denomination. They were kicked out of the Southern Baptist denomination because they were welcoming from church and young women in ministry. They were kicked out of the local association. Their pastor resigned because she was too ill to continue. And in August of that year, as a result of a hate crime, the church was arsoned. And the church found itself in a storefront and was trying to figure out who it was and how to be. And they found themselves rewriting their vision statement. And one of the things that they said was that we believe we have chosen to be a people in exile. We are alienated from the traditional places where we found identity, security, and power. Like Israel in Babylon, we remember the prophet's call to take up a new identity, to see the world in a new way. We discover that our wandering takes on purpose and meaning, for it is precisely here in exile that we can learn what it means to trust. I remember on a Pentecost Sunday, several years, or a year or so after a couple years after the fire and a year or so after I arrived there, we had a symbolic taking down of the pictures. We were in a storefront and we had these wonderful black and white pictures of the burned out church and with a shell of the building. And we kept on looking at these things, and we kept on looking at them and looking at them, and they were bumming us out like nobody's business. They were keeping us in the exile. They were keeping us in that place of victimhood. And it wasn't until we were able to take them down that we were able to start seeing our way out of the exile. It was an important piece. We were told to build and to plant and to live. And on the site that was the former church, we cleared the lot and put a community garden in there. And every Easter morning since then, there's been a sunrise service in the garden where the church used to be. When we finally left the Mid-American Baptist churches and affiliated with the Rochester, Genesee region, we started using our energy as a congregation in a different way, didn't we? We no longer spent our energy responding to the agenda of another group. Instead, we started using our energy for new ministries. During this time of exile, we realized that we could redefine what our presence was. It was around this time that we started doing intensive refugee resettlement. We started amping up our involvement with our sister church in Nicaragua. Our bell choir went on 3 tours. And here we are, spending our time now remembering our stories, claiming our stories, articulating our stories, and celebrating our stories. In exile, we didn't give up. We didn't find ourselves defined by the exile. We built houses. We repaired this building. We planted vineyards, even a garden on this site. We celebrated marriages and holy unions. We dedicated our young, baptized our youth and our adults, buried our dead, and through it all celebrated life. We lived on in spite of the exile. So think about this. If you've ever felt left behind, if your known world has crumbled, if you find yourself in uncharted territories, take a cue from Jeremiah. Plant some seeds. Tend to the soil you're in. Pray for those around you, even the leaders, and even if you didn't vote for them. Now there's a thought. Hold your festivals. Don't be defined by exile. It's not the final word. But also don't wait until the exile has ended to live your life. Live it now. Celebrate it now. For God is with us in the exile, perhaps even more noticeable. And we'll notice as we plant our field and celebrate our banquets and our birth of our children, we'll notice that there are companions along the way. We're not alone. We're blessed by family and friends and sojourners who remind us of who we are at our core. I can't think of a better representation of God than the one who stands by us in exile, saying that there is light at the end of the tunnel. A light in the distance, and we are strangely drawn toward that light. And we travel there alongside our companions in the exile. And they call that companionship in exile the Church of Jesus Christ, the local manifestation of which is University Baptist Church. Thanks be to God, who is with us in the midst of the exile. For this God encourages us to live on in spite of the exile.